Good morning, good afternoon, and a warm welcome to all joining us today for our virtual event titled Making Family-Owned Businesses More Agile and Preparing for the Opportunities Ahead. Delighted to once again be collaborating with our partners for this event today, Grant Thornton Kenya and CMS Daily Inamdar Advocates, both leading firms in East Africa. And I'd also like to thank all of our speakers and panelists today, all experts with extensive experiences in their respective fields. I will let each one introduce themselves when they speak. In a moment when we move to our main feature of the event, the panel discussion. By way of introduction, Jersey Finance is a not-for-profit organization that represents, promotes, and develops Jersey's forward-thinking financial services sector and our International Finance Center, which is 60 years this year. So we're very proud of the heritage of our island and our finance center. I'm also very pleased that one of our member firms and a member of our financial services sector is involved in this event today and is part of the panelists, JTC Group. Perhaps he'll provide an insight and a better understanding of these close ties, decades-old ties that Jersey has with Africa. Jersey Finance is uniquely placed as we operate globally, effectively collaborating across our global teams via our offices in Jersey, London, Dubai, where I'm based, Hong Kong, and New York, along with representations in Shanghai and in Johannesburg, and our flying model to India. Jersey's engagement in Africa is based on mutual respect, shared commercial interests, and understanding. We support, very importantly, we support inbound flow of capital into the continent, which helps in job creation, and the further development of the continent that we all love. But increasingly and interestingly, we also support globally focused African corporates, family businesses, and we have a fantastic family business represented in the panel discussion today, and entrepreneurs that are looking to do business globally from Africa. Jersey's relationship, as I mentioned, is multifaceted and cross-sector. But obviously today our focus is on the financial services sector and specifically family businesses. Africa is a key region for Jersey and its financial services industry. We've been traveling to the region. We have collaboration and connections with the region that is decades old. Our key markets are Kenya and East Africa, Nigeria and West Africa, Rwanda within East Africa, and obviously South Africa and Southern Africa. East Africa is our focus today, and specifically Kenya, which is the leading economy in East Africa. It's the largest economy regionally and one of the largest on the continent. And specifically from the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, Kenya has played a leading part in this particular treaty. It was the first signatory and the first country to ratify the Continental Trade Area agreements. This Pan-African agreement is promised to reach a $3.4 trillion GDP and 1.3 billion market in terms of consumers and people, making it one of the largest trading blocks on the panel. Family businesses, of course, play and will continue to play a key role, whether nationally, regionally, or continentally, through this new, very exciting agreement. Today's discussion will further explore the role of family businesses, and our experts will provide strategic guidance on how family businesses can operate with agility and purpose to be best placed to take advantage of the opportunities ahead. Before I finish, and to put some relevance to the discussion, let's look at some facts and figures that demonstrate this critical role of family businesses globally and continentally. At a global level, a majority of the world's wealth is created by family businesses, and family-owned or majority family-owned businesses contribute 70 to 90% of global GDP, and they also are responsible for 50 to 80% of global employment. In the new business space, this is also fueled by family involvement. Some estimates put it at 85% of global startups being established with family wealth. On the continent, family businesses represent 20% of the top 100 businesses continentally. And through the crisis, as we've seen, family businesses on the continent remained resilient, experienced growth despite the challenges, and interestingly, a majority of them kept their workforce as is throughout the crisis. Testament to the organization and agility of these businesses anyway. This discussion today, we hope, will bring some of these facts to life. As I mentioned, we have a fantastic family business on the panel, and we can get direct insight into some of the challenges and opportunities that the family business itself has seen, exploring the challenges and opportunities generally and the future of family businesses in this post-crisis area. So thank you very much. I'll be available to answer any questions at the end of the presentation when we have our Q&A, generic Q&A. We hope you find this discussion useful. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce Dipesh Shah, who is the managing partner for Grant Thornton in Kenya, who are obviously our co-hosts for today, to say a few words before we move to the main feature of today's event, our panel discussion. So Dipesh, over to you.
Thank you, Faisal, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. As Faisal has said, my name is Dipesh Shah, and I'm the managing partner of Grant Thornton in Kenya. We, as a firm, are a leading professional services firm in the space of audit, tax, advisory, and serving loads and loads of dynamic businesses. And these dynamic businesses are global, local. We have global reach and operate locally as well. We are present in more than 130 countries and staff strength of 58,000 plus. Today's topic for the webinar today, making family-owned businesses more agile and preparing for opportunities ahead. COVID pandemic has been with us for about 18 months, and in the process forcing businesses to adopt agile practices to ensure businesses are resilient and are sustaining within the community. It is in this regard that we viewed this webinar to be very useful at this point. And if I just talk about agility and looking forward, it is also very timely. We, as Grant Thornton International, we are launching our Go Beyond strategy, and it is all about agility. It is all about looking at the future and operating in a manner that we can sustain our operations for the future. This is not only applicable for bigger corporates or multinational, but more so for family businesses, like Faisal has articulated some of the statistics. For us, agility is very, very important. Like I mentioned, it's an integral part of our strategy. Going beyond, so looking in the future and operating today to adapt within the future. An interesting acronym, VUCA. Kenyans can understand what VUCA means. Yeah, so we have to be volatile. The environment is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. We have to operate in this with clarity, if I may say. Thank you, and passing over the baton to the next speaker, Hane Khan. partner and corporate and commercial at CMS Delhi Inamdar Advocates. Thank you once again. Welcome, Hani.
Thank you, Debesh, and happy 60th birthday to Jersey Finance. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. By way of introduction, my name is Hani Khan, and I'm a partner here in the corporate commercial department at CMS Daily and Namda Advocates. We're one of Kenya's leading law firms. Our firm is a full-service law practice, it's one of the oldest and most reputable law firms in Kenya, where we trace our origins back to the year 1899. We joined the global top 10 international law firm CMS in October 2019. We now have over 4,800 lawyers located in 70 cities around the world. For us, joining CMS has been a very positive and beneficial step in our commitment to support clients, expanding our reach to include the international legal market, especially considering the increasingly regional and international nature of most of their businesses, as well as the importance of Kenya as an attractive destination for foreign investment. Despite being part of this international group, we remain a very Kenyan-centric firm and remain trusted advisors to generations of Kenyan family businesses, which is why we're very excited to be here today. I'd like to thank the teams at Jersey Finance, Grant Thornton, and CMS Africa for their collaborative effort in bringing our three organizations together to host this event. And of course, our special guest, Mr. Harshil Kotecha of Babari Investments, for kindly volunteering his time to be with us today. We look forward to building on our working relationships with each one of you. Thank you. The topic today is relevant and often missed. I'm personally very keen to hear from our panelists and learn about how family-owned businesses have made themselves more agile as they prepare for the opportunities ahead. On behalf of my partners at CMS Daily and Namda Advocates, I wish to echo Faisal's comments and Depesh's sentiments. I'd like to extend my appreciation to our distinguished panelists for very kindly taking the time out of their busy schedules to be with us today and share their invaluable insights with us. I'm going to introduce each one of them separately when we commence the session. To the audience, thank you all for attending, and we hope you enjoy the discussions. If we don't have time for all your questions at the end, do feel free to reach out to us directly later with any inquiries you may have. Right, just jumping straight into it. More and more as a transactional lawyer, I find family-owned businesses pushing ahead to embrace formal governance structures to keep up with the growing competition in their respective industries. This is merely one of the catalysts I found behind these moves. Let's bring in one of our panelists, Sailesh. I'll begin by introducing Sailesh. He joined JTC Group in 2018, where he's the Group Director, Private Clients, JTC Group. Sailesh has over 30 years experience working in fiduciary and banking settings. Most of his broad experience has been connected to larger private families and corporates with links to Africa, where interestingly, he's both lived and worked. And I understand as soon as travel opens up, he'll be visiting us more. Sailesh, you've worked very close with businesses in Africa, and more particularly Kenya, for 3 decades. Can you provide us with a snapshot in respect of private client market evolution within Kenya?
Thank you, Hani. And of course, my thanks also to Faisal of Jersey Finance and Grant Thornton. Hani, it's a pleasure to be on the panel. You know, I sit in the beautiful island of Jersey, which we represent, Jersey Finance, of course. And our business, JTC itself, has been dealing with Africa, you know, for many, many years. And we are listed on the London markets, and we actually have been you know, serving this market much longer through our legacy acquisitions, going back to, you may recall, the mp4 Hospital in Nairobi, and the family that, you know, the mp4 family were part shareholders of JTC as well. So we have a lot of legacy going back many years with this market. And I guess in covering this market myself for over 3 decades now, which you know, I've seen changes. Initially, I started walking the street, if you like, on Bazaar Street, walking shop to shop from different clients who had smaller relationships with us. They opened up small structures outside to essentially serve their families who are relocating and almost spreading and diversifying their risk out of Kenya. And as the markets evolved, those who were very small shopkeepers sort of went out of the picture, and new generations came in. We started dealing and I started visiting the industrial area, for example, where a lot of the shopkeepers then, started setting up industries. And more recently now, of course, we deal with their private offices, which are based often in London and also in Kenya, and requiring much more sort of sophisticated requirements. So in that process, I've seen sort of families, relocate, much more dispersed, much more international in their outlook. And the evolution of the market remains positive, certainly for JTC. And yes, as you rightly say, Hani, we'd love to travel there again, but of course, travel will not be the same. So we work with colleagues and partners on the ground as strong as we are, working with colleagues who travel into the region.
Thanks, Sailesh. And you were born in Uganda, I understand. So you're truly an East African. And I was also really impressed to hear you make references to geographical locations such as industrial area. Driving more to the crux of our topic today, your role currently is primarily managing international family businesses across Africa, not just Kenya. And you've been privy to some of the significant challenges family structures are currently encountering in this climate. What would you say are some of these recurring pertinent issues?
I think one is disconnect. You've got next generation that coming through many of these businesses. There's a disconnect in terms of lack of planning around succession, structuring. And that, I think sometimes the purpose for the family and their business and commercial interests is ill-defined, and often that creates conflict. There's conflict amongst family members because there's a lack of communication, lack of transparency almost felt, and sometimes these issues are put on the back burner, and it then creates an impact on the underlying business, and then that becomes much more difficult to resolve. I mean, take our example. In the old days, you could sit with a cup of coffee across with a patriarch and resolve an issue, okay, just between the two. Now, you've got, I don't like to call it next generation, as they like to call themselves the new generation. They will come with their lawyers. The patriarch will have their lawyers and we would have ours. And the dynamic has completely changed. And often that is a result of a lack of planning, lack of listening to advice, and often that creates issues which can carry on and create work for all of our professionals, if you like, for many years to come. So I think conflict resolution has become very important, but conflict is just the end game, and because many families have not dealt with the issues that really they need to sit down together and work on. To not get to that conflict stage.
Thanks. Sailesh, it's so disconnect generational dynamics, poor structuring, lack of transparency leading to conflict. All of these are quite common. And so conflict resolution becomes pertinent, as you've said. Let's speak to a conflict expert. I'd like to introduce Grace Kinyanjui, who's a partner here at CMS Daily Namda. Grace is in our litigation and dispute resolution department. She joined the firm in 2014, and her main areas of practice are civil and commercial litigation, in employment law, in environmental debt recovery, and she represents clients in all sorts of dispute resolution tribunals, including the Court of Appeal, the High Court, and various quasi-judicial tribunals. Grace, you're with us. As a dispute resolution lawyer, I'm sure most of what Sailesh has just touched on resonates with your own experience. Talk us through some of the common issues you've had to litigate on, and briefly walk us through what you feel are the root causes of these issues.
Thank you, Hani. I hope everyone can hear me. I'm very pleased to be in this session today. And I'll start by saying that disputes are often inevitable in any business setup, and family businesses are no exception. And if anything, they're a lot more prone to conflict because aside from the owners being business partners, of course, they share family and social ties. And this predisposes family businesses to have a wider platform from which conflicts could occur as compared to non-family type of businesses. Now, given this reality, a family business should take a higher level of caution to avoid disputes and to ensure that if disputes occur, then the business is adequately prepared to manage them. Now, one of the common issues I've litigated on relates to succession, and I'm happy that Sailesh has touched on this. Succession and control when there is an exit by one or more owners of the business. And when remaining owners disagree on the direction of the business, and there are no predetermined agreements, for example, shareholders' agreements to refer to for guidance, disputes tend to arise. And a common scenario that I've observed is where the structure of the business is such that one member, usually the oldest and most experienced among the founding owners, is the one responsible for making all decisions, while the rest hold equal rights. Take, for example, a common business setup of 3 owners, just a typical example, consisting of a husband, a wife, and one other member, in most cases, one of the children of the couple. Now, for businesses that fall within this particular example, this structure often works smoothly when all the members are alive because key decisions are determined by the main owner. However, disputes occur later on when the main member exits the business for one reason or the other, including death, and specifically where the business does not have a well laid out succession plan. And in most cases where this happens, we'll see the remaining owners begin to have conflicts over who will exercise control or whose decisions will carry the day. And this already is a complicated situation, and it can get more complex where the remaining members have equal rights because any lack of consensus between them leads to a deadlock in decision making. And complications such as deadlock in decision making can be very costly to a business because they lead to missed opportunities. For example, opportunities to invest or engage in partnerships that could be of benefit to the business. I have particularly litigated in a case where a business could not make a critical investment decision because of a lack of consensus between 2 owners following a disagreement on control. And this led to inability by one owner, by one of the owners to constitute the required quorum to pass an investment decision. And now a court order had to be obtained to permit one owner to constitute quorum. And as you can imagine, it's very costly and it can get time consuming having to obtain a court order permitting an exception to quorum every time a business decision is needed. And we have recently seen a decision by the High Court of Kenya earlier this month, where owing to differences between 2 shareholders of a major cement distributor, a quorum for approval of restructuring of the company's facilities could not be achieved. And one shareholder had to obtain a court order to allow him to constitute quorum in the absence of the other. So as you can see, again, in this example, it had to take a court order for a business to obtain exception to quorum in order to pass such a significant and most likely a time-sensitive business decision. And perhaps this is not a scenario that could have occurred if the business had planned ahead by anticipating a possible deadlock and putting in place clear provisions to address this. And another area where I have had to litigate on is on enforcement of wills of deceased part owners of a business, and particularly where there's a lack of specified guidelines on how shares or the interests of a deceased part owner are to be dealt with. There are many instances where a part owner of a business will have prepared a will where they pass on their interests in the business to third-party beneficiaries who may not be preferred by other owners of the business. Or it may be that it would be difficult for the identified beneficiaries and the remaining part owners to work together for one reason or the other. And such kind of a scenario takes me back to the importance of having a predetermined agreement amongst owners as to how interest should be dealt with in their absence. Because with a predetermined agreement, there's no room for undesired surprises, as owners know in advance who would be joining them and in the absence of the current owners. And this way disputes are, of course, minimized. So the import of all this is that while it is prudent for business owners to prepare the individual wills, it is equally important for businesses to have predetermined agreements on succession planning relating to the business. And when preparing wills, care should be taken, of course, to ensure that any wishes expressed in wills are then consistent with the succession plan guidelines of the business where such interests are held. And such measures can be achieved with the guidance of legal experts. For instance, at CMS Darlin in AMDA, we have a team of experts that advises on estate planning, and getting this specific advice would be very beneficial to any business. Thank you.
Thank you, Grace. A lot of very important points you make there. As a corporate lawyer, I'm constantly engaged in drafting these constitutional documents. Just before we go forward, for the audience, I'm sure you have a lot of pressing questions, and if you do, feel free to post them in the chat, and we'll pick up on those at the end. So please do post your questions, as they come to you, and we'll try to attend to all of them. If not, we will try and get back to you after the event. Grace, just going back to what you said, I agree. When we're talking about governance documents for the benefit of our audience, what we mean is essentially your constitutional documents. Some of you may not know what those are. You have your memorandum and articles of association, which are your general rules on how decisions are made in your company, but those are bolstered by documents such as a shareholders agreement, where you address things such as succession, what happens when there's deadlocks, how do you make a decision. It's so useful to have. And they always say that you need to preempt these things. So if you have those documents in place in advance, you avoid all the litigation that Grace has touched on. You avoid having to go and get court orders to make decisions. One of the things Grace touched on, I've experienced myself, where there are deadlocks and opportunities are missed by businesses because sometimes the court process can be very long and the business isn't able to keep up or make key decisions in time. Thank you, Grace. Those are very, very useful thoughts that you've shared with us. Lynette, I'd like to bring you in at this juncture. Lynette is the Associate Director of People and Culture at Grant Thornton. She is a strategic and innovative people and culture leader who translates business vision into HR initiatives that improve performance, profitability, growth, and employee engagement. Lynette, you have over 10 years experience as both an HR generalist and an HR consultant. It's great to have you here today, and you bring in a very interesting and pertinent contribution to today's conversation. You've listened to the advisors discuss some of the critical challenges faced by family businesses, including what they feel have been contributing factors to these challenges. What's your take from an HR human resource perspective? Let's focus on three common ones. I'm sure you have plenty to share.
Thank you very much, Hani, for the question, and I couldn't agree more with what Grace and Sailesh have said. So a major challenge that family businesses have faced is being able to, that transition from an informal management style to a formal management style. So from a HR perspective, the three main challenges I have observed are, the first one is lack of structures, and some important questions that family businesses need to ask is, are reporting structures right? Are they enabling or disabling? Do they have skilled people placed in the right places? So we have noted that recruitment and placement becomes very complex in family businesses because they want to ensure that family members are part of the business. So what this has done is it's created skill gaps and a bias in recruitment, and a challenge in, especially whenever there are non-family members joining, feeling that they have non-professionals overseeing professionals. A case in point is a client that I've been advising who's had a son train in chemical engineering. The client is in manufacturing. So once the son completed the degree, he came and he was placed as the sales manager. Outwardly, there you can see a skill mismatch. So what eventually happened with him being placed in that role, he lacks the skill to even draw up a sales strategy. So that was already a setup for failure. And agreeably, sales started going lower because that is not his line. And then something else that we have noted is in the past, the only qualifying criteria for recruitment and placement has been loyalty or just the passion, but skills now is noted as a key challenge. The other aspect is when organization structures are being introduced, then the challenge of professionalizing the processes. For example, performance management is true and correct feedback given to family members. Are we able to sit a family member down and give authentic feedback to say this needs to be improved, or also recognize and reward what has been done right? So we find that implementing performance management is a challenge. Then disciplinary management as well. And a case in point, again, is a client that I was just speaking to a few days ago, who runs a family-owned hospital. So he's gotten most of his relatives into the business. And when he had to give one of them a warning letter, the next day he had his brother on phone asking why was the warning letter issued? Couldn't they have sorted it any differently? So that's one aspect. The second, just like Grace and Sailesh mentioned, is succession planning and that generational gap or disconnect. So the challenge that family businesses here need to look at is the next generation groomed? Again, a focus on skill, readiness, and willingness to take up the roles. And also looking at the perspective of training, how is training done? Are we looking at training as a need and doing what is good for this person for them to generate or be able to implement organization goals? Then the final one is compensation issues. This is a major concern in family businesses where you find that family members get paid higher than other professionals who are non-family members. The effect of this has been low morale because non-family members feel discriminated, and also the question on whether or not compensation then is merit-based because it's fairer for family members compared to the others, even against skill and qualification. Thank you, Hani.
Thank you. Those are the very important points you've made, and I just feel this theme that we're building here, the lack of structure, reporting structures, more importantly, and what I found very interesting to hear from you, Grace, is it's no news, but yeah, skilled people in the right places, family members placed in roles that they may not be experts in. Also very interesting to have the chemical engineer working in sales. I assume that's just to fill in the gaps to ensure that the family is making key decisions, but sometimes you may have the wrong person in the wrong role. And then you talked a little bit about training. I also found your mention of the performance management important, so that all family members are appraised in the same way as all other employees. They should be the same structure applied, across the board, without any interference from business owners. It's good corporate governance at the end of the day. And you talked about succession, something we've heard from the other speakers, skill readiness and willingness, and compensation issues leading to discrimination. So those are, again, it all boils down to good structuring. I like where we're going with this because I'd like to introduce a family business owner at this point. Harshil Kotecha, he is the director and owner projects at Pabari Investments. His professional experience over the past 15 years spans across business development, business turnaround, and strategic deployment of resources. Being in a leadership and strategic role, Harshil, for the majority of your career, you've been instrumental in acquiring and turning around various businesses across, importantly, various industries. And that's why I'm particularly excited to speak to you, Harshil, because you're not your typical family business owner. It's not, this one industry that you've been in for decades and decades. You're in multiple industries, and you seem to have found how to manage it all. Harshil, thank you again for being here today. The lawyers, the managers, the HR experts have all shared their experiences from an advisory perspective. I'm curious whether these are challenges you've at some point also had to grapple with as a family business owner.
I will say thank you, Hani, for giving me the opportunity. Thank you, everyone else. I think everyone's given a more formal approach to how to ensure that family business succeed. We would like to give you our version of Pabari Group, which today has crossed approximately $500 million in turnover. And we did well during COVID because we didn't let any of our employees go. So I think we are not there yet to be complete corporate, but we have actually reached or passed the 70% mark. Even though, honey, a lot of issues in the family are like bedroom talks, I think they should be formally discussed. And it's important that when we handle these issues, there shouldn't be like a short-term solution of like taking a Panadol. So if you allow me, I would like to first address the problem on as-is basis, and then tell you how we as a group have addressed them. I think the main issue here is that, and I think it's for all family businesses, is everyone knows what to do. But the question we need to address is, do they really know what they know? Or do they really do what they know? Because it's in the mind, but when it comes on paper, can they address it? What happens here is, and rightly as Grace said, lack of strategy and lack of business direction, because what is in their mind does not come out on paper. The second issue is a lot of family business, and when they move from first generation to second generation, they are part of the business. So they would think it's common sense. And what they do is inbuilt in their blood, which is true till a certain perspective. But we all need to recognize that common sense is not common practice. For them, they feel that the knowledge they have is power. But in actual sense, the knowledge has the potential to be power when we apply it. And this application has to be done through the right professionals. Otherwise, just as I think Grace or Lynette said that we had a chemical engineer being given a sales position, and it would never work. Probably because he was involved in the business, he thought that this is the right approach. The third thing is, a lot of these generations, they have gone to prestigious universities abroad and they come back with a lot of knowledge. Again, this knowledge which they bring back, does it really resonate well with the current scenarios in the business? So what I'm coming back to is that we need to get the right professionals in place, just the way I think Grace and Lynette have said. But the most important is, are the founders or are the main partners who are involved in business really going to trust these professionals? So who do you get on board, and how does this professional come on board? I think as Pabari Group, what we've done is we've tried to source professionals who somehow the founders have some kind of relationship. And it is through this that the founders had trust, and they were able to sort of talk to them about the problems of the business, and then it's taken through various stages. Now, I'll tell you, when I joined the group, it was largely involved in different businesses already, and it was very important to put a variety of structures in place. And this was done through a number of different methods, done through our auditors, Sunil Dowda and Company, which is now JNS. So we had an auditor who is a second generation auditor, and he was able to mitigate the generations. We've been working very well with Grant Thornton. They did audit of our books when they were Vipul Shah and Company. So the trust was there when they bring responses and ideas. We have our head of legal, who had family background which were sort of related to our founders, and we know his family quite well. So I think what I'm trying to say is, yes, we have the answer to all the questions, but how these answers are put on the table is very important. It's not possible to just recruit any professional at a senior level and imagine that the founders are going to talk to them, because a lot of family businesses has a lot of secret which is not coming out, and it is the mechanism on how we bring this out, put it on the table and have a discussion. So with that, Hani, I think if there are any other questions from other speakers.
Thank you, Ashil. In fact, you preempted my next question, and that was so useful to hear from you, the insider version, I'd call it. You know, you being on the inside and seeing this and listening to the professionals talk about what we think are the issues. And you know, you've simplified it, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but you agree that you should have professionals taking on major key decisions, but those professionals should not just be anyone. You talked through some of the organizations and people you work with in the form of auditors, accountants, your lawyers, and what I was getting was that these are people who are both skilled, experienced, and most importantly, understand your business needs. And that way they're able to gain the trust of the family owners and work together with them. I also appreciate the fact that your organization works with the experts. It's not a common theme. You're quite right. A lot of business owners will shy away from you know, seeking external help for a number of reasons. Like you say, there's trust issues. There's certain matters they don't wish to discuss, and they have this feeling that we've done so well for 70 years. Why involve a professional at this stage? Ashil, I don't know if I've missed anything there, but what's coming through is synergies needed with your professional advisors and trust. You want to build a long-term relationship with these people so that you can work together to grow the business. Yep. And just moving quickly now to Sailesh, statistically, and in my own experience as a corporate M&A lawyer, I've found that more and more the real successful family businesses, like Harshil's, regardless of the industry or jurisdiction, are ones adopting more rigid constitutional and governance structures as preemptive measures to avoid most of the issues we've been discussing thus far. As a management company, Sailesh, talk us through the hows, if you agree with me, of course, highlighting what you found family businesses are actually doing generally for better planning and structuring, both at a personal and a commercial level.
Thank you, Hani. And I think many of the subjects covered, I mean, Hashi has raised the crux of many of the issues that face most of our families in East Africa. I mean, many families cover, I mean, you made reference, Hani, to the governance documents and so forth, and that is just, you know, one element to it. So, you know, the family needs to sit down and lay out what purpose it wants to serve, how it sees itself in the future, how it will, you know, what are its principles of its founders, and how can that be sort of permeate down into the family mechanics and dynamics, and then ultimately have an impact on their businesses. I think the documents are good through professional assistance, you know, can be put together, and the family can get some structure around that. The other point is that many of our families are internationally make up. They're not just Kenyan focused. I mean, you've got vested interests, that shareholders' interests sitting in London, sitting in New York, sitting in Australia. So you need to find proper structures that also cater for them. You know, proper planning in terms of succession structures. So companies like ours, of course, you know, we do, you know, we are trustees of trusts and private foundations and private trust companies, asset holding vehicles, you know, with different asset classes being held through there. So you've got enough depth there to be able to draw upon organizing the family and their affairs to make sure, because if that's not right, then it does permeate all the way down the line in terms of, you know, the family engagement. in that process, you create a structure for proper engagement within the family. They're all got vested interest in the underlying shareholding businesses. How making sure the information flows, making sure there's proper reporting back on a regular basis or a pre-arranged basis. I think technology makes it easier as well. I mean, we've all got sort of in our business, we offer a sort of, maybe our higher end families fine, but we offer a sort of almost family portals where people can go into and access their own sort of records and their own balances and so forth. And that makes information flow much more smoother. And I think with that organization, then it has a much more viable and sustainable impact on their underlying commercial activity, because it removes sometimes the emotional aspect to their family business. It allows perhaps the new generation to sort of diversify from that family business by investing and by working in sort of related businesses or even unrelated businesses, and that could make it much more agile for the future. It will enable them to spot opportunities in new technologies and new service lines. It can also enable families to give clear roles and responsibilities to those members, and also pathways, career pathways within the family business, to take away this emotional aspect of it, favoritism, skill sets, and so forth. And I think there are ways, and I think it will create a better new generation properly engaged with the family at both their personal levels, as well as their commercial levels. And I think that is the way, the family can structure themselves better for, moving forward, and being successful as a family unit and also as a commercial unit.
Thank you, Sailesh. Again, just we're going around the whole theme of decentralizing decisions, and I mean, as you as a management company, again, you talked about decentralizing a function that allows the family then to focus on strategy, and diversifying. You provide an invaluable platform that helps with structuring. You talked about operating as trustees. It's all very interesting, and I'd like to go back to Harshil here. Harshil, you run multiple businesses across an array of industries and countries. This via the family business model. I'm curious how you did touch on this a little bit, but how are the key decisions made in your organization? You talked about having the auditors, the accountants, and the lawyers, but what's your structure for decision making? Do you have independent third parties on your board, or are such decisions reserved only for immediate family members? And for the benefit of the audience, these are things you can put into your constitutional documents, your shareholders agreement that was touched on earlier by Grace. So Harshil, tell us a little bit about that.
So Hani, I'll start with, obviously the business was started by two brothers who inherited it from their family, and as the businesses grew, there was requirement for increased oversight on the business. I think as we went along, and the founders being very open-minded, they were quite clear in their business strategy that as a group or as a family, we know how to run certain businesses and we don't know how to run certain businesses. For example, the investment we've done for a sugar project in Kenya, we actually made a decision to bring in a partner and give them an equity stake of 20%. We have a pharmaceutical business where we've given a sweat equity to a professional. So the open-mindedness of the founders actually helped us better than other businesses, that we need to involve professionals. At this point in time, we obviously, with consultation with our stakeholders, auditors, we do have independent board members for different companies. And for example, for the sugar project, we have 3 independent directors For the pharmaceutical, we have 2. For other businesses, we have between 1 and 2, because they're operating all separately. But overall, what has really helped the business is actually having family meetings which are conducted on a quarterly basis. And these meetings actually call in the 2nd and 3rd generation, who are actually made to understand on where the family is going, and also give them room to give in their inputs and their ideas. And I think these quarterly meetings have really helped the group to iron out, whatever issues, problems, because a lot of these are emotional problems. And I think it's not a secret that when there is a family business, you get this silent input from your community on how this business should be run. So when you get this time to have this family meeting, you have a professional come in and make them understand as to why we will invest in certain businesses and not in other businesses. Thank you, Hani.
Thanks, Harshil. That's interesting. I'm sure the audience is really enjoying this. So what I've got from that is essentially your founder's very clear on strategy. You have one of your companies where you've retained one of the experts, which is a third party. So it's not a purely family business on an equity level, and so they have shares in your business. I assume again on a minority interest. But you have them there, so they're invested and they're able to then share experiences and expertise, advice on how the business should be steered. That's a very important thing. So you take away the ego and you say, right, we're not experts in this particular area. Let's have a joint venture. Let's work with the experts and move this company forward. Also on your sugar project, sweat equity, for the benefit of the audience, is where you're given a free carry. You're given shares in a business for your expert experience or your skill set. So you benefit by owning a part of the share. You're invested in that business, and therefore I found most people who carry sweat equity and free carry are more committed than your employees would be in at that level of seniority, of course. And then you also talked about having independent board members. So again, for the benefit of the audience, when the directors sit down to make critical decisions, Harshil has said to us that not only is it just the family sitting at that table, they do have independent experts sitting on the table to provide that sort of impartial advice and guide the family with these decision-making processes. And one key thing you also mentioned was family meetings quarterly. I like that. You're bringing in the next generation. You're being open to new ideas. We call them the millennials, and they want to be involved. And I like that you're bringing them in. You're teaching them and also being very open to the ideas. And then this applies not just to family business, I believe to every type of business. I'm just cautious that we're looking at time here. So Grace, I'm going to move quickly to you. As an employment and labor law expert, Grace, what's your take on what Lynette earlier said on the contributing factors to challenges faced by family businesses? Are there certain pertinent landmine legal issues our audience ought to be aware of in respect of employment practices within family businesses? And can you provide us with a few steps to mitigate these? Just quickly, I'm just thinking about time here.
Okay, thank you, Hani, and thank you, Lynette and Harshil, because you've highlighted the importance of having structure and merit in management and decision making. In my experience, many family businesses tend to be a bit more relaxed and less formal when it comes to the management of human resources. And this obviously creates room for exposure of the business to liability in connection with claims for violation of employment laws. For instance, some businesses do not give employment contracts to employees with the hope that the employer can achieve greater flexibility without such contractual documents. However, not issuing employment contracts can in fact cause a business serious difficulty later on, and specifically during separation with employees. And in some jurisdictions, I'm aware employers are legally required to provide employees with a contract, and failing to do so would expose them to liability. For example, employees who do not have employment contracts could formally lodge complaints at the Employment Tribunal or the Labour Office, in order to get clarification as to their terms and conditions of employment. And obviously, this is a complication that can be disruptive to a business, especially if an award of damages is made. And another prevalent issue is the perception by businesses that it is much convenient to have basic written statements of employment as compared to proper and detailed contracts. Now, to the contrary, and in my experience, a clear and detailed contract of employment that outlines exactly what you expect from employees can help to safeguard your business interests. And of course, it may not be possible to have all the terms of employment spelled out in a contract of employment. And that is why it's the formulation and application of employment policies, handbooks, codes of conduct, and other business-specific employment regulations, in addition to an employment contract, is an effective measure in ensuring that a business is able to manage its human resources while also avoiding disputes. And this especially because properly drafted contracts and employment policies bring clarity of terms to both employers and employees, and this way disputes are minimized. And it's also important for business to regularly review and update the employment contracts and policies, and of course with the help of legal experts, particularly when, for example, the business has developed or undergone significant changes. And this is important because it helps to ensure that the business is up to date and can effectively protect itself against potential conflicts with employees. And engaging the services of an employment law expert when formulating employment-related policies is crucial. And this is simply because changes in employment law and practices occur frequently, and they affect human resources management. For instance, one of the changes that we've seen recently is related to how employers should manage employees on probation, and whether the rights of employees on probation during disciplinary and other internal processes are similar to those of employees not on probation. And we've also seen developments regarding extension of probation of employees. And the point here is, without the guidance of an employment expert, a business could expose itself to risks of potential damages for violation of developing legal provisions. And I must also add that prior consultation is very useful in avoiding disputes, and organizations that have sought guidance prior to carrying out employment processes, for example, when downsizing or redundancy processes, such organizations have managed to avoid potential claims because timely engagement leads to identification of potential claims and prior formulation of appropriate measures to avoid such claims. And I think Lynette touched on this. Claims of discrimination are also quite prevalent in family businesses, and it happens mostly in businesses that have an employee pool of both family and non-family members. And it often usually is in connection with promotions and disciplinary processes. For example, an employee could claim that they have been bypassed in a promotion or disciplined more harshly as compared to another employee who is a family member of the business owners. Now, this claim can lead to an award of damages that could obviously be disruptive to a business. And in worst cases, employees can file complaints to the labor office during the pendency of the employment or after resigning for constructive dismissal on the basis of discrimination. And however you look at it, such claims could be disruptive to a business. And lastly, in most family businesses, I see risks associated with a failure to designate the human resources role to a skilled expert internally. And having a HR expert is useful because of early internal identification of risks, especially for growing businesses. And it may seem cost-friendly not to incur expense associated with a HR expert and an employment advisor at the early stages of a business. But if care is not taken, the risks that could befall a business later on because of lack of timely guidance could be significant and much more costly compared to the cost of early guidance. Thank you, Hani.
Thanks, Grace. Thanks, Grace. So, we're now into specific documents. We talk generally about what the issues are, the challenges. Ashil talked us through some practical examples. And we started off with the corporate documents, the constitutional documents at the top. We went down to the shareholders agreements between the owners, and now we're talking about specific employment contracts. Obviously, I'm very curious quickly, if you don't mind, Harshil, I just want to ask you a quick question. For your, you said when you joined the business, I assume, do you automatically join as an owner? In some family businesses, you join as an employee, and I assume you have employment contracts for family members, so that they have these structures in place as well, and it's clean and clear. Because I've seen in my experience, a family member will sue a family business on account of, say, an employment breach. Is that something that you have for family members, Harshil? Your microphone, Harshil.
Now, honey?
Okay. Yes, thank you. Yeah.
So, honey, I was privileged. When I joined, I didn't have an interview. I was the nephew to the founder. And though I was the nephew and I joined well, but I had the privilege of going through what an intern goes through. Okay. And because of the good wisdom of the founders, one of the sons who is now part of us, 2 daughters are part of the business. They all actually went through an internship in the business, because I think in our case, the founders were quite in their day-to-day business, they were very much in touch with NGOs and the government. So they sort of knew that as the business expands, structures are needed. But obviously, as a family member, you come to find out that you have more powers than anyone else. But these powers could help you mingle in an accounts department, HR department. But when it comes to our legal department, then we couldn't mingle because we didn't have the knowledge. As I say, we think common sense is everything and we keep mingling. But later, when the legal department was there, I found out that when you seek prayers, it's not prayer to God, but prayer to the courts. So slowly we came to find out that let the professionals do their work, sound it to them conceptually, let them internalize it and give you the right advice. So our business is of the founders, but I know generally a lot of businesses suffer the egos, which actually make them not listen to the professionals. And I think that's where they go wrong.
Thank you, Harshil. And that's the thing. Investing early on in these documents. I'm so glad Harshil has endorsed my service, providing legal services. It's something that sometimes is missed quite a lot of the time. As Grace said, you'll come to a lawyer when the problems have started or it's too late. But you can preempt that and save a lot of money when you have these structures in place. We were I want to quickly jump into culture and bring you in, Sailesh. Let's talk culture. How would you define? Sorry, just staying with you. My apologies, Harshil, if you don't mind. I just want to talk about culture. How would you define your family business culture? And is there a distinction to be drawn between the actual family culture and your business culture, or are these two intertwined? And is that a challenge?
So obviously we do have a mix of both, honey. We have the family culture, and slowly you see the professionalism also coming in. You're not going to change the founder's way of doing work after they've been in the business running it successfully for so many years. So I would say we work on a 50-50 ratio, and that's why the trusted professional is required, so that we can all sit down and discuss what the founder's concerns are, what he thinks we can use to mitigate, how can we find a solution to whatever problem is there. So it's a mix.
Thank you. No, And we've got someone who's an expert on this here. We have Lynette, who's Director of People and Culture at Grant Thornton. You know, just drawing from what Harshil said, Lynette, what culture is, you know, it's one of those quintessential contributors to success in any business. What's your take on this, Lynette?
Thank you, Hani. That's an interesting question, and I do agree with what Harshil has pointed out. So culture is key to the success of any business, and this is because it defines both the internal and external identity of the business or the company. And it's also key to the strategic success of that business. So what culture does is that it transforms the company into a team, brings different people together, and have them aligned to a common purpose. So this way, then there's a balance between company values and the impact on performance, and then impacting directly to employee welfare. And then something else that culture does is it affects the way people interact with each other, and this includes customers as well. So you find that potential customers make decisions based on how they feel or what they know about a company culture, and so do potential employees. And it's interesting that even when trying to fill certain positions, even at C-suite and highly specialized positions, you find that people articulate to what they've heard about a certain organization, what they like or what they don't like about what they've had, just to show how much culture affects both investors, customers, and employees. So it's also important to know that we cannot say that there's a good or bad culture. But when it comes to culture, we talk about an effective or an ineffective culture. And this is because organizations are different and have different values, but the main aspect here is to align the culture to the organization strategy. So what makes a culture effective or ineffective is what I'd mentioned, matters of structure, and also what we show our people as what we believe. And we can just use the analogy of the iceberg, which is very familiar to all of us on organization culture. So what's at the peak is what we say, and this is what people see, and includes formal items such as vision, strategy, and we have what's below or underneath the surface, which is what is really done. And this includes perception, tradition, and emotions. So, and if in an effective culture, then there's no difference between what's above and what's below the water. But in an effective one, then there are very great differences between what people say and what they actually do. Thank you, Hani.
Thanks. That's interesting. So, and I think, you know, you agree then with Harshil. There's a balance. There's no real. The only distinction to be drawn is between an effective and ineffective culture. Harshil feels it's a balance, and I believe that's the case for all businesses, regardless of whether they're family owned or not. The owners and then the managers, they need to strike a balance between what culture really fits, what do they want to portray themselves as, you know, to the outside world, and what do they really need as a culture within. And quickly, just with you, Lynette, what would you say are your, as an expert in this in the culture field, your top 3 critical HR interventions which may serve family business agility?
Thanks, Hani, once again. So number 1 would be to align the structures. And what this means is to align those boxes that we have on the organogram to the strategy or the value chain of the business. And just to speak to this is that the owners also need to note the importance of delegation. All the leaders need to realize that this skill has to be passed lower, and this will enable succession planning in the end and support recruitment and placement, as I had mentioned earlier. The second aspect is having succession planning strategies, and this is to facilitate smooth succession. So the business should have a plan in place as to how to deal with either emergency or planned exit of the founder or of the incumbent of some positions. So what that means is the role of HR here comes in to ensure that they're developing the younger generation and developing them to be professional owner and managers. And this includes training and tailored development interventions for the skills that are necessary for those particular roles. And finally is compensation. So having a very well laid out compensation philosophy and organizations should promote equity and fairness regardless of the relationship. So again, here looking at skill set, looking at what Grace mentioned, promotion strategies, are they merit-based, and looking at the need for development to enhance the progression and having very clear career paths. Thank you, Hani.
Thanks, Lynette. That's brilliant. And I'm sure most of the audiences this evening, when you're having your dinner, you're going to have the word structure playing over and over in your mind. But it is that critical. We've talked about aligning structures, number one. Number two, planning exits for the founders, working with an HR team to develop the younger generation. Number three, having equity and fairness in terms of compensation. And this is, you know, these are all critical things you need. A lot of the times, family businesses will shy away from this because they feel that perhaps we're going to give away the family business to someone else, but that isn't the case. You can still develop your family and your family business using these structures without creating conflict later down the line. Grace, I'd like to explore the actual disputes. This is when family businesses find their lawyers a little too late. Businesses often seek legal advice once these issues are beyond internal remedy. We've seen this time and time again. Everyone reads the newspapers, and we've heard of hugely successful families suddenly disappear as soon as a founder or someone is to pass away, and the structures weren't in place. You've seen splits happen. What are your thoughts on the preemptive steps? What can these family businesses do now, now that they know what the issues are? We've discussed them. What can be done earlier to prevent conflicts from occurring, or if unavoidable, to minimize the impact on the business should an issue arise?
Thank you, Hani, and I agree with you. Many family business disputes are foreseeable because almost always they revolve around ownership, control, compensation, etc. And as such, a family business should have in place business policies in advance with clearly outlined ways to resolve conflicts around these areas. It's always important for businesses to invest in their policies by, again, I emphasize here, by obtaining legal guidance. And I've highlighted earlier that failing to put in place proper policies in advance, it may seem cost-friendly initially, but could actually harm the business down the line. And one step that could be very useful in minimizing occurrence of disputes is having in place conflict resolution mechanisms within the constitutional documents of the business. And in my experience, family businesses that have this in place tend to handle disputes a lot better than those without. It's useful to have a dispute resolution mechanism that is flexible enough to allow for opportunity, because this is a family setup, to first attempt to resolve conflicts through negotiations, conciliation. And if such mechanisms fail, then through facilitation, for example, by involving a neutral, mutually agreed third party. And in family businesses, this can even be a reputable family elder. And if these preliminary mechanisms don't work, parties could go ahead and try alternative dispute resolution methods, such as mediation and arbitration, so that going to court is a last resort, because of a lot of the secrets that families could have wanted to prevent earlier on may not be protected when disputes are in court. Now, for family businesses which are incorporated as companies, it would be very good for the members to have shareholder agreements in addition to the basic constitutional documents. And this is because a lot of disputes occur during shareholder exits. And if there is a proper shareholders agreement in place, as I said earlier, it would set out shareholder exit mechanisms. And we've seen that lack of such mechanisms, for example, on transfer of shares, transfer of assets, and other interests of exiting family members can cause serious disruption to a business in case of unregulated departures from the business. And a good exit mechanism should have provisions for consideration of the value of the business to enable proper and fair payment to the departing members in case they want to cash out. And this is because disputes usually occur when an exiting family member perceives that their interests are not fairly valued. And a well-detailed exit mechanism can go a long way in preventing such disputes. And additionally, having a mix of both family and non-family members in the management of a business is another good way of preventing disputes from escalating, to serious levels that can be avoided. And this can be achieved by, for instance, having on board non-executive directors who are qualified experts. Again, Lynette touched on this, qualified, and even Harshil, qualified experts in relation to the core business of the organization. And this is particularly important because non-family parties are more likely to remain objective in the face of a dispute. And they could also be particularly useful in management roles. For example, again, Lynette touched on this, the evaluation of performance and capabilities of staff. And that is an area that requires a high level of objectivity. So lastly, it's useful for family members in a business to just actively invest and engage in development of skills such as listening and communication, conflict resolution, and to just remain accepting to the principle that any consideration for, let's say, promotions, elevation, or rewards in any form should be based actually on merit as opposed to other subjective aspects, such as assigning a role to a family member on the basis that they are, either a firstborn, middle child, or a lastborn, regardless of their capabilities. Thank you so much, Hani.
Thanks, Grace, and thank you, everyone. I'm just conscious that we've got 10 minutes or so to the end, and I'd like to bring in the audience. I have Faisal, who's going to, perhaps he's been looking at the questions, and I'll let Faisal take some of these, and maybe I'll become a panelist at this point as a corporate lawyer and answer some of them.
No, thank you very much, Hani, and thank you very much, panelists. Excellent deliberation. I think we've covered a lot of ground. Some of these questions may be repetitive, but I'll leave it to your individual judgments if you want to go over any specific points again. But the first question I thought was quite pertinent. We've got something around raising finance. How can family businesses make themselves more attractive as they come out of the crisis to attract both third-party professional investors or indeed finance both locally and internationally? Perhaps Hani, we can start with you on that, and maybe Harshil can give us an insight from a family perspective.
Yeah, sure. This is what we're seeing more and more of. Becoming investor ready. What does that mean? It's essentially what Harshil has been talking about, working with your experts at an early enough stage to ensure that everything starting from your constitutional documents to your accounts are adequately looked at by experts. Your structures on decision making are in place, so that when an investor comes in to look at your company, they conduct what is known as a due diligence. That means they will look into your books, your records, your financials, and your legal structure to see what exactly is going on. How does this business operate? Of course, one of the most key things is this business financially performing? And then some of the other things I look at, do they have the requisite licenses, etc., in place? This is where these experts come into place. And if you're investor ready, all your documents are in place. They look at your shareholders agreement, which is something we've been talking about. How are decisions made? How do we come in? How do we fit in? So it's very important to be investor ready by conducting an internal due diligence, working with your lawyers and your financial teams to make sure that you're investor ready. Now, we know what investors look for, and that's why it's very important to engage with your lawyers and your financial advisors to ask them, well, look, we want to be investor ready. What do you think we need to do? And this is what we're looking to achieve. We will then talk you through how to ensure that you have all the documents ready, how to structure your documents, make sure everything is up to date. I could talk for days on this, but given that we have limited time, it's essentially making sure that you are ready, both from a structural and financial angle, to show your business to an investor.
Thank you very much, Hani. That's very useful. Harshil, do you want to add anything from a business perspective, your own experience, perhaps?
So, Faisal, thank you very much. I think when family businesses borrow money or previously borrowed money, it was more of a traditional finance. So you have your fixed deposits, or you have your land, you have your car, and you take the money, you borrow, sort of vanilla, use the money and return back. But as families grow, and for example, in Pabari Group, as we grew and we required debt, we sort of looked at the project finance perspective, where the project itself is checked by the banks, or is checked by the people you're going to sell equity to. And this actually brought in something called a proper vision or a clarity in vision. And this now brought in the documents which Hani is talking about and which Lynette and Grace are talking about. Because without this, they wouldn't want to put in any money. So what comes in is proper bookkeeping, which obviously a lot of family businesses don't have. You need to ensure proper governance. This is where independent directors come in. And most of all, once they've funded the business, they would like a proper structure, which brings in very good accountability, so that there is clarity in the business and obviously on their returns for investment they've made. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Harshil. I think that's a very well-rounded answer, and I hope that addresses the query that was made. Next one is political risk. And obviously, political risk is a reality across the continent and plays a key consideration for family businesses in Africa, impacting on their performance. How can family businesses, or how have family businesses been impacted, and how can family businesses deal with this? If I can go to Sailesh and maybe Grace to give us an input on there, purely from an outsider perspective, because I think this may be quite sensitive for an internal family business to answer. So just your overview continentally would be good, and also Grace, from a dispute perspective, maybe you can just give us a couple of sentences on that. So let's start, Sailesh, from you.
Yeah, it's not, in a way, we deal with families across many regions, not just Africa. So we have Latin America, for example, Asia, GCC and so forth. They all have different risk factors that come with it: political, economic, currency risk, personal safety. All of these factors affect and are ingrained throughout our market. So it's not unique to East Africa. Okay, so and I think the bigger risk these days is really this lack of understanding that there's a shift from shareholder to stakeholder outcomes, right? And if you look at, there's a buzzword called ESG, for example, right? And actually, if you assess that, for example, your business, no matter how well you structure outside or within, has a corporate governance. But if you're, in Kenya, you have this very well-used phrase now, bottom up. And so if the top down is fine, but the bottom up is, not as ingrained and connected, then inevitably you will face not just political risk, but you could wipe out your business, if your factory goes and affects the environment and so forth. So I think one way is that, businesses are now looking at, yes, they're organizing themselves, but they're also ensuring that that same culture fits in through their family businesses, their commercial interests. So they're looking at the environments they're operating in, their manufacturing processes, the impact they have, their products have, the way their distribution channels are, the sales channels, the quality of their welfare of their employees. Diversity, the impact on the local communities, all these are sort of interconnected, and I think that is possibly a bigger risk by not understanding and engaging with it. And actually, these values are immensely powerful and authentic in naturally aligned with a family's DNA and their values. And I think that is of more importance. Yeah, I mean, spreading risk is important. You spread your risk by diversifying out of your core business sometimes, and with new industries developing. Political risk is just one element of a wider management and impact of your culture within your businesses and within your families.
No, it's a very good point, Ellis. And I think if I'm understanding you right, you're talking about understanding your risk, keeping up to date with what the risks are, all of them, including political, and then obviously mitigating it, whether it's engagement with the wider stakeholder. All very important points. Grace, did you want to add anything on there from your own experience? Whether from a family business, should they be thinking about something from a conflict perspective internally with management? Is this some kind of risk that you would be advising on?
Thank you, Faisal. I think I would echo what Sailesh has said, and just to emphasize for family businesses again, for family businesses to be aware of the trends that affect their businesses and upcoming things or important aspects of their business. I mean, they would need to, of course, invest in having experts and advice across the business, and so that the business is not caught up because of having inadequate or lack of knowledge or lack of an understanding. And so again, just to emphasize on, taking expert advice across the business.
Thanks very much, Grace. I think you both have answered that within the boundaries of what we can. So thank you very much. That's very useful. I think we have time for two more questions. Silas, you've mentioned ESG. I'm going to come back to the ESG one, but I thought this question is very good. Succession and governance, and both from a family perspective, but also family business perspective, should both be addressed in tandem, or is it better to deal with one first? If we can perhaps explain the difference. So maybe we can start with you, Silas, and maybe bring in Lynette, and then Harshil, maybe you can give us a rounded view on your experience as a family business and how you address that. So Silas, over to you.
Yeah, no, thank you, Faisal. That's a good question. I guess it's a blend of the two, that one is not distinctly separate from the other. I think the way you govern a family, with, the principles, the way its roles and responsibilities, the reporting structures, the accountability of seniors in the family, are not dissimilar to the way your underlying commercial activity is happening. I think those same principles follow down. I think the addition for businesses in commercial angle to it is to ensure that you've covered off the compliance and regulatory aspects of the work you're doing, because the impact of not doing so will obviously trickle all the way up, as well as trickle all the way down into your businesses, as well as the impact on your families. So I don't think one is distinct from the other. I think the structures you put in place for your family are not dissimilar to the way you will then approach the family businesses, the way they run, the type of people, their career pathways, accountability, regulatory compliance in your businesses, as well as obviously, you got your, ESG aspects to just generally the way you're conducting yourselves as a business and conducting yourselves as a family in terms of your values.
Excellent. So Lynette, you talked about fairness and equity in the internal family business structures, when you're looking at employees coming up the ladder, non-family employees and family employees. So what's your views on this, on the separation? How important is it? How should it be dealt with? At the same time, or are we saying separately?
Thank you, Faisal, for that. And I do agree with what Sailesh has said. We look at them in tandem, though if you analyze deeper, you realize that with a clear governance structure, that enables a better succession plan. Because once you've been able to put the structures, then you're able to answer the question of what's a high-risk position for you and what position are we trying to groom for. So once we have those structures, then you're able now to have a clear succession path in place. And also, just going back to governance, is even looking at the board, how is its composition, because then with the board comes board committees, what's the responsibility of each, and how is accountability being spelled out for everyone who's sitting in the company or the business. Thank you.
Harshil, what's your experience from a family and family business perspective?
Yeah, Faisal, I think they both go hand in hand, because as you set up the governance structures, it will call for succession. And it's very important that as you prepare proper governance, the succession will take care of itself, because it will ask that the current chairman, how many times will he stay on board? The independent directors, they need to rotate. So the family members will be there, but obviously the independent ones will have to come new, and this will bring in succession altogether. So I believe if the governance is done properly, succession will take care of itself.
Very good answer. Thank you very much, Harshad. I think final question, we're just running out of time, but final question, I think several of you have mentioned ESG. So how important, so we've got ESG and impact, ethical, green credentials. How important are these for family businesses as they become more agile? So I'm going to open this up to all of you so you can have a few seconds to answer that. And let's start with you, Hani, from your side.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting one. I found, I was just reading about this recently. In fact, family business leaders, they're the ones who can be responsible because they've got a legacy to leave behind. I think it's becoming more and more important to family businesses. They're realizing their potential contributions can have a huge effect on the future of the planet, particularly if they collaborate with one another. And like I said, I was reading about this. Not only are you doing something that's, obviously essentially good for the planet, but the responsibility and the investor readiness. You find a lot of investors are now looking at, how responsible is a business? What are they doing in terms of ESG? There was, I think it was a chocolate production company in Switzerland around 2016 that there was all these headlines about child labor used for the manufacture of chocolates, etc. And they moved away, and their plan was to essentially come up with a sustainable type of chocolate where, all the raw materials that were being used would come from, responsible organizations, and they'd assist with, things that were more driven towards good governance, social, environmental, and they've done extremely well, and they've grown significantly. Obviously, I just read about this a few days ago, so I can't speak about it. But my point is, responsibility is key to all investors. So you're ticking off 2 boxes. Number 2, your reputation as a family business. You need to take into account ESG and be both investor ready and just maintain your reputation. It's something we've worked on with companies quite a lot.
I think your point on investor awareness and positivity is quite key. We've seen in research, independent research, 1 in every $3 have now got ESG consideration to it that's being invested, and investments with an ESG label tend to do better than non-ESG considered investment structures. Silas, do you want to sort of add in there in terms of your experience for family businesses that are open to ESG having a more longevity, perhaps?
Yeah, I think you got to embrace ESG, and ingrain that within your family values and ingrain that within your businesses. Because you talked about raising finance, and many African businesses are now confident, they're aligning themselves, proper governance structures and so forth. And one of the factors that any investor from outside, whether it's a development finance institution, whether it's a PE investor, whether it's another business family from outside of the region who wants to invest with another family within our regions, then this is one of the critical factors that they will be looking at. I mean, as JTC, we recently invested in a business which provides, if you like, ESG audit and guidance and so forth. And one of the reasons why we did it is because it will be part of every balance sheet that you will read now, that statement and that clarity will become the norm. So ESG is actually now ingrained. It's no longer, whether it's only 20% or something, it's actually part and parcel of your business.
No, that's a very good point. And mandatory reporting is a reality, certainly in the Middle East, for example. for listed entities. So that's a very good point. Lynette, for you, did you have any comments on your side? How important is ESG for family businesses?
Yes, thanks, Faisal. Just to agree with what the previous speakers have said and to emphasize that it's becoming a very critical point for investors to evaluate, because they don't want to get into investment with a business that poses an environmental risk.
Thank you very much. Grace, for you, any last word from you in terms of ESG? Did you want to add anything, credentials for importance on the business side?
I think just to build on to what Lynette, and maybe because of Lynette as a HR expert, I think for companies or for organizations that are key on ESG, of course, even attracting talent and it has been said, even funding, of course, it's a key thing to consider for that because of the benefits, obviously.
Very good point. So I think young people are very aware of it, and they look at these credentials when they're looking to, talented people looking to join family businesses. Last word from you, Harshil, your family business. How important is ESG and green credentials, not only from your offerings and products and services for the various operating companies you have, but also as a family and as an organization? How are you embracing that?
Has become important over time, and more than stakeholders, we find that new employees which are seeking jobs and who you want to hire are looking at this very, very, you can say, with more focus. And they would ask you up front what our values are on the ESG. So it's something the group is now starting to look at very carefully, because we know that in the next 5 or 10 years, if we want good talent, ESG is going to be a very big component of this.
Thank you very much, Harshil. Thank you very much to all. I think, Hani, did you have any closing words for your panel before we close the event? Because I think we're 10 minutes over, I think.
Over time, but I think we've driven the message home. It's all about structure, preempting. I think I just want to thank everyone for being here. Thank the panelists for all their contributions, and also to Jersey Finance for hosting us. We really appreciate this. If anyone in the audience has questions, you can reach out to us. Our contact details are on the website. We'd be happy to get in touch with you and assist.
Yeah, thank you very much. I echo that sentiment also. Thank you very much to our co-sponsors for the event today, Grant Thornton Kenya and CMS Daily and Amdar Advocates. Thank you very much to all of our panelists for bringing their expertise and time and sharing their thoughts with us and insights. Thank you to all of you, all of the audience that have been listening in. The recording for this session will also be available on our website, jerseyfinance.je, but also CMS and Grant Thornton will also make that available on their website. So thank you very much to all of you, and enjoy the rest of the day and the week. Thank you so much.
Thank you.